So there is a really important passage, at least one that I really like. This is from the Katha Upanishad. The Upanishads are a very ancient level of Hindu scripture. And this verse from the Katha Upanishad, it expresses well a sort of a Hindu commitment to the idea that knowledge of God, knowledge of the self, and knowledge of yogic practice are the keys to getting free from suffering. So the verse says, after receiving this knowledge of the yoga rules taught by death, Nachiketas attained absolute reality, Brahman. He became free from death and self-controlled. Others will too who know these teachings about the Supreme Self. So again, this verse is expressing the idea that if you attain knowledge of Brahman and become free from death, then you can become free from suffering, because death is seen as the very embodiment of suffering. It's indicative of you being in this cycle of birth and death, and there's no escape from it. There's no escape from suffering. So if you can free yourself from that, then you have freed yourself from all suffering. I think it's fair to say that for the most part, the Indian religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism, have seen freedom from suffering as something that is a theological and metaphysical problem, and it's something that can only be solved by sort of getting out of the world. Nevertheless, I think there are some really important Hindu movements that have sprung up that have sought to sort of repair the world. So for example, the Hindu Bishnoi, which these are followers of Vishnu. It's a movement that started in the 15th century in Rajasthan. And it's described as an eco-theological movement. And they sought to end deforestation, to end hunting, to prevent water pollution. And many people involved in this movement, they were willing to self-sacrifice. When people came in to cut down forests, they would hug trees. They were like the original tree hugger movement in the 15th century. When hunters shot mother deer, they would get the deer, the baby deers, the calves, I guess, and they would feed them. There's even women who have breastfed baby deers themselves in order to save their lives. And this is a movement that continues to this day. There are many ecologists are continuing to be inspired by this. And the idea was that we need natural resources for not only for the benefit of the trees and the animals and the plants, but also for human beings. It destroys our own ecological systems. When we destroy our own ecological systems, we also destroy our own economic systems. In the 20th century, Mahatma Gandhi became very well known for his humanitarian movements, and he wanted to lift up what he called the Harijana, people who had traditionally been sort of looked down upon by Indian society. He was a Hindu who wanted to end the caste system, who wanted to sort of shine a light on the abuses of people who were considered untouchables and outside of human society. And he was a great inspiration for people like Martin Luther King to this. The Hindu traditions, I think, speak more of dharma, which is a duty, something that should be done for its own sake, rather than of a calling. I'm not aware of any Hindu text talking about one's calling. Rather, they look at human life as being governed by this term called dharma. And dharma is a huge, huge term in Hindu discourse, as well as Buddhist and Jain discourse. And it refers to things that you must do, simply because you have to do them. They're either just the way you are, and that's the way you have to do things, or sometimes they're considered the commands of God, the rules of God. And there are general dharmas for all human beings, And then there are specific dharmas that you might have as a man or as a woman, or as a married man or as a married woman, or as a son or as a daughter, as a king, as a teacher, and so forth. Any sort of station that you find yourself in life, there are dharmas that govern that. And I would argue that many of these dharmas are aimed at social welfare. You have to do things so that you don't end up harming other people, or that you end up harming them as little as possible. So rather than some people being called to alleviate the suffering of others, I would say that from a Hindu perspective, all human beings have dharmas that instruct them or even command them to do things that relieve the suffering of others. So to this question, I would say that really it's in the hands of the practitioner. They have to sort of negotiate this for themselves. There are very, very extreme examples of people who are willing to completely self-sacrifice and who did self-sacrifice for the benefit of all others. And I have a quote from this for this. This is a devotee speaking. It's in a text called the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and it was composed in the 16th century. And he is speaking to God himself, who had descended into the world. And this is what he says. Your descent into this world, my Lord, is to save the world. Give me one blessing. I see the unhappiness of creatures, and my heart is torn. Lord, place the sin of all creatures on my head. Taking the sins of creatures, make me suffer hell. Lord, dispel the illness of the world for all creatures. So in this passage, the devotee is saying, I see the suffering of all people. It's caused by their bad karma, their sins from the past. Take all the karma of all people in the world, put it on me. Let me suffer for them so that they don't have to suffer. So this is obviously a very, very high ideal to live up to, and it's not, and why it may be an ideal that Gaudiya Vaishnava may say you should strive for this. It's obviously not one you can say like everybody should do that. So I think it's this balance of self-care and other care is something that one just has to negotiate for oneself. One has to understand what the highest ideals might be and decide whether that's something you can strive for.